Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Southeast Climate Alliance knowledge sharing evening. So what this is all about is really from our alliance, which is in Sussex, Surrey, Kent and Hampshire. We have many members, in fact, over 130 organisations in the Southeast. And any of our member groups, can offer these knowledge sharing events, which particularly in the winter, when it's dark, it's kind of a good time to be sharing this knowledge. So whether people, we are going to turn the cameras off, those that are not speaking, to just save on energy. But we were wondering to start with just how many people were already members of the Southeast Climate Alliance, because it's interesting to know new faces that are either inside the area or who aren't a part of the Alliance. So we were wondering about doing a poll, but it's good to maybe people can kind of like put in the chat where you're from and if you're already a part of the Alliance or not. And we will talk about at the end, if you're not, how to join up. We're getting some thumbs up happening around the place here. So this evening, welcome everybody, is about regenerative agriculture. So it's something which is kind of like hot topic at the moment because it's deemed to be like the number one, one of the biggest cause behind climate change is agriculture and food waste, and therefore composting and lack of it, and where we need to be moving to. So tonight we are going to have a few different speakers with us. We have got Ed, the rebel farmer, who is from Kent and will be speaking about his input in agriculture and market gardenings. Kate with an amazing community garden and working with the CSA. Andrew with Trenchmore Farm and regenerative cattle. Tom talking about soil and compost, and I will do a little overview of the kind of international think locally and act globally, or think globally and act locally. So that's a little bit about where we're going to be going. If we could hold on to questions until the end. If you want to have a question and you want to put it in the chat, please could you put a Q before your question, so it makes it easier for us when we're looking through the chat, anybody that has a question. So then we can come to them all at the end rather than interrupting at the end of each of the speakers. So that was a little intro, and so I hope you're all sitting comfortably. And over to you, Ed. Welcome, Ed from Kent. You're on mute. Yay.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Nicola, for inviting us. We met at the Permaculture Festival this year for the first time and really hit it off, and had an amazing conversation there and had a couple of good chats since. So really lovely to be here. I'm originally from London. I'm now in Kent. I came down from London in 2015. Originally a punk drunk tree surgeon from southeast London. I had a bit of an epiphany in the supermarket soon after my boy was born, and went on this headlong trip down in towards permaculture, and ended up here in Kent trying to find solutions to these global problems. It's very much influenced actually by a lot of online content and stuff. So I started out really doom scrolling on Facebook and getting very angry at the world soon after my boy was born. And I came across this thing called permaculture, which I think it was a Jeff Lawton TED talk actually, and it set me off on this complete path of change and renewal for myself and for my family. I think I'm a bit of a sort of an example of how it's not too late to sort of change, and how you can get you can really turn things around even at sort of at the age of 30. I hadn't started a seed until the age of 30. I think I'd grown a tomato in my London garden before I left London, and now I grow year-round food for me and my community. It's been quite a journey, very progressive one. Things change year to year, but I think that's exactly what permaculture is about, isn't it? It's about learning from the observations and continuing to redesign this sort of life around permaculture. Yeah, I was a tree surgeon in London, so I had some sort of like you know, basis in working outside and working hard with something natural like the trees, and that's really fallen in love with the trees and the gardens. Was able to sort of name all of the different plants and shrubs in the garden, but I had this one problem which I think sort of really sort of sent me off on this course into permaculture, and that was really about the green waste that I was creating every day with my work. So being a tree surgeon, I'd fill the truck up. I didn't have a chipper actually because there was never space to park a chipper in London. So I used to just razz down this green waste on the back of my truck and fill up the truck all the way to the brim with logs. And I'd go off on my merry way towards the dump, which was on 9 Elms Lane, right up by the River Thames in London. It'd be a right nightmare to get there. And I'd be giving away green logs along the way, green wood, just giving it away because I had to get rid of it before I got to the Weybridge up at 9 Elms Lane. And yeah, by the time I got there, I usually just had the brash on the back, and I could get rid of the logs. But it would cost me money to get rid of this stuff that was on the back of my truck, which I now consider a resource, but at the time was a waste and it was a problem, and it used to cost me money. So when I discovered permaculture and stuff, and I made this move down to Kent, the first thing was really on my mind is being able to fully turn this waste into a resource, and I set about doing that by really just composting it on my field. So I'm on a 3-acre homestead here, I suppose. And when I got here, I just started collecting waste products, like muck, chippings, anything that I could get my hands on, any waste wood out of skips and stuff like that. And I slowly built a market garden with this. It took me quite a few years to get my head around this compost game, and there wasn't as much knowledge out there as there is now. I mean, it's great to see. I mean, it's lovely to be on the call with Tom today. Really influenced by some of the stuff that I've been learning from him over the last few years. But you know, at the time I was just like mixing muck with chippings just to see what would happen, and it took a few years to sort of really work out what I was doing. But I managed to establish this lovely market garden, and really continued to build on that. And I think that, you know, really part of the solution to the sort of the climate crisis we've got is really all about having this time to firsthand experience some of these things, that like trying to create compost, and really sort of taking that in day to day and understanding like how to create super rich compost. I learned along the way that this super rich compost was the feeding. It was the base block of like feeding this soil life. I really didn't know anything about soil biomes or anything. I just knew that I was trying to create this sort of medium that I could grow food in to start with. But over the time, this progressive nature of mine, I just started to really dig deep with a lot of different books and YouTube. And I think one of the things that really that I really sort of took on board quite early on was the whole no dig idea. Charles Dowding was very much an amazing influence on me, and yeah, those early sort of when he was first started putting videos out really on YouTube, I was hooked. I mean, he went crazy during lockdown. His YouTube went completely crazy, but before then it was quite quiet actually. I was getting some good traction, but yeah, so that was a big influence. And yeah, I started growing these veggies. First, I didn't really know what I was doing at first. I remember growing chard for the first time. I'd never even eaten chard before. I'd grown up in the supermarket in London. I really didn't know what to do with this stuff. So I just sat there and I watched it sort of do its whole like life cycle. It watched it sort of grow and live and die. I liked to watch it get attacked by the slugs, and you know, I saw how it lived throughout the winter and into the spring, and bolt to flower the second year. And it was fascinating. And all of these sort of first-hand experiences, the things that really sort of drove me along. but you can really, by looking at these things and really observing nature do its full cycle, I've just found so much yeah, well-being in that really, and I'm really now an advocate of this sort of observational permaculture, and understanding that observation is like a real act of rebellion, believe it or not, like giving yourself the time to look and watch what happens when you start a seed, what happens, how that interacts with the environment, what it tastes like, and how it interacts with yourself. And it's really sent me off on this quite deep journey now. So once I started and established growing some food, I moved on to trying to build a community around it. It started with a small garden from my son's school, and I built out of waste products and some local waste from the landscapers. I built this lovely little garden for the school, and that was my first real input into my local community, and it got me a bit of a standing as someone local that wanted to do something and change stuff. And I was thrust into this learning and teaching journey with the kids, growing lots of food. And yeah, and before we knew it, I was sending this food out across Kent. So now Rebel Farmer has been a bit of a producer for the last few years, and we've really been coming in with lots of volunteers, learning how to grow food at a community level. And we've had woofers living with us long term. The woofers have been living with us for the last few years, and now this next year coming up, I'm really hoping to explore building community around these sort of the cyclical nature of life, and really yes, I'm really calling it hoping to call it regenerative rhythms, and sort of trying to get people understanding the rhythms of nature, very much connecting with the moon and connecting with the drums and the fire and the food. And we're trying to create these celebratory events where people can really connect with the world, just locally. But we're also going to be inviting like groups down, corporate groups from London and stuff like that, to help support the project, but very much wanting to work with the schools to try and get this sort of idea and these ideas of growing food as community into schools and into institutions locally, to try and make that change. I think, again, thinking locally, thinking globally, acting locally is definitely the way forward. And yeah, I want to be one of these solutionists as we sort of as we move on, to really making this change. And I can really see that change is very much on the horizon at the moment, with all of the madness that's going on in the world. So yeah, that's my little story. There's lots more to learn at rebelfarmer.co.uk, and I'll have a look on my Instagram. You'll find out more. So yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ed. I will I'll paste in everybody's website so you can have a look at how great what Ed's doing. It's really inspiring to see his, the restaurant inside the polytunnel and all the amazing sprouts and the microgreens and everything else that you're doing. So yeah, we'll put that in. Just somebody reminded us that if you haven't already, then make sure that your view is on full screen, so you're not looking at all the little lots of people. So you can go up to view, and you can choose speaker instead of gallery, so that you can get the full screen person. So that's a much nicer way of looking at the presentations. So thank you, Ed. And over to you, Kate, who follows on from Ed, has been doing something very similar, but also, amazingly working with her local community. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much for inviting me, Nicola. It's really nice to be here. I'm Kate Green. I'm the founder member of Petworth Community Garden, which is my local community, and a CSA, community supported agricultural farm. I've done some designs I'm a permaculture designer as well, and I've done some designs on schools and care homes and kind of keep growing gardens. They keep coming out of me somehow. But at the moment I'm settled with the community garden and the farm, and I will share my screen if I am clever enough to do that, to just show you what we've been up to. Does that come up okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I will whiz through. I've got loads of slides, but let's see if I can do it. Okay, I'm not able to move it in this moment. Oh, I could do it earlier. I wonder, Jeff, could you move that for me? Or do you need to put it up yourself?
You might need to put up, maybe close it.
Oh, hang on, no, it's moving.
Oh no, here we go. We're moving. We're moving.
Here we
Yep.
So yeah, so I'm sort of do quite a lot of I started to do a bit more teaching, permaculture teaching, and I use the community garden as a really, really good way of showing how permaculture can be sort of, you know, bringing it down into sort of the world, permaculture in action. So I just do a very quick, Nicola's asked me to do a little bit about permaculture, a little bit about the community garden, a little bit about the farm. So I will try not to speak too fast. But permaculture, for those that don't know, lots of people do. It's the most exciting thing I've ever come across in my life. And I think it's, like Ed was saying, it's just so brilliant to find something that you can do. And I really love it that you can do it wherever you are, whoever you are, however you are. So the basics of permaculture, the ethics underneath it all are earth care, people care, fair shares. And it's a design approach based on observing nature. So I won't go into the ins and outs of it all, but I'll just show the community garden and some of the principles which are taken from nature can be sort of shown in community gardening and also many different sorts of gardening. So Petworth Community Garden, it's 20 next year. I can't believe that we started it up 19, 20 years ago. It's an accessible organic and wildlife garden for the community. We share free fresh fruit and vegetables. We teach organic gardening and permaculture, and it's now developed into a social and therapeutic horticulture place. So this is what we started with. It was sky high in bindweed, and yeah, the observing and interacting is the first sort of principle. And then, but very quickly using the permaculture, the kind of mulching and the taking small, slow steps with myself and a couple of lads, local lads, one with learning disabilities, one that happened to be loitering. We started to make some sort of headway into it. And yeah, it started to transform. People appeared from the community. Very quickly, we had lots of children involved. Mums, I've got a daughter. My daughter's second from the right there. She was very little at the time. And so we created a little children's garden. People from the community sort of found out what we were doing. We had no funding. It was just as myself as a gardener, I would bring a few seeds, people would bring whatever. And the community just rocked up with, oh, I don't know, pots and ponds and a greenhouse. And so the design element of it was very sort of light touch in that, you know, the ethics are there, people care, fair share, earth care. But really we would just create from whatever came and whoever came. Yeah, we've always had a lot of children involved, and it's great to have children involved, obviously learning how some of the children that came, they were living in flats without gardens. And if you learn about it, if it's there as a child, it's there, your love of nature is there. I really believe that obtaining a yield is pretty important. I love good food. I think it's really important to get good healthy food out to everybody, not just people that can afford it. And the community garden started off really with that mission in mind, to have free, fresh, organic food to people who couldn't afford with the limited means, whether that was health or space or finances. And so we grow the food together and we share it, everybody that comes. And also really important to get year-round food. So we got a polytunnel a few years in, and working with a whole range of people, ages and abilities, you know, really young, really old, up to the elder people, people with learning disabilities, mental health support needs, people with social issues, just really diverse community group. Also diversity, really very important for the organic gardening, is to create habitat, so lots and lots of wildlife habitat. That kind of does our pest control for us, bringing in all the good pest predators. And very quickly, actually, we put a pond in and we filled it, and we dug a pond, we filled it, we created a little wildlife garden, and we put some wood over it so nobody fell over it overnight. And we were going to do more work on it the next day. We took the wood off. There's a frog and a toad. They'd found it immediately. So it's that whole thing about, you know, creating the habitat, and wildlife comes. Looking after the soil is really important. Lots of different mulching, composting, ground cover there, water harvests. We use water butts as well. I think we had 12 at one point. Lots of composting. We've got a lot more compost bins than that now. It's quite an old slide. Making comfrey liquid, leaf mold, twigs. We tried to find ways of dealing with bindweed. That was an interesting one. Bindweed seems to kind of crawl out of whatever you put it in. So actually what we tend to do now is, because there's a lot of bindweed on site, we'd use sheet mulches, and then you can pull the sheet mulch up with whatever we found, old carpets or whatever was there, and then you can just harvest all of the bindweed roots, and that really reduced it. We've got solar panels up on our activity shed, so that's our electricity in the shed, and we've made about 2/3 of it wheelchair accessible. This guy here is using the hose because we actually were adapting to his needs. So, you know, we use the water butts and lots of watering cans. But for him, he's only got the use of half of one of his hands, really. I mean, he's a fantastic member of our group. And using that, so we got the hose for him specifically because he absolutely loves getting everyone wet. But it also is really good OT for his hand. And we just adapt according to who comes. We've got a fantastic wheelchair accessible composting toilet, and yeah, integration rather than segregate is one of the, you know, permaculture principles that we really work with. So a whole range of different of the community. Lots of learning together. We've always got a lot of children in there, so we're learning together, we're teaching as we go, learning as by doing, really. And supporting young people in the community as well. This young woman on the left, she hadn't left her house for 3 years, I think it was, because she'd been bullied. She's got very mild learning disabilities, and she'd been bullied in the community, and had done her sort of statutory learning, and then had just gone into her own room. And I knew that she did a little bit of gardening with her dad, and her sister just brought her to us. And creating a space where people could just be themselves without their labels, and just to be kind of accepted and find a way of using their skills. So I knew she did a little bit of gardening, so I asked her to prick out a fair few babies. And by the end of the session, she had this big beam on her face, and there was absolutely plants everywhere that she'd pricked out, and she'd had a really good time. She's come every week since then, and helps other people when they come in. It's a really lovely feel working in community in that way. So the most recent thing that we're doing, reaching our community, obviously we have people that come from all walks of life, but and we always share the food at the end of the day. But with the more recent crisis, cost of living crisis, we have been responding to that, and we work with a food bank. So any fresh veg that we've got about 15 to 20 families that we take our food out to, that use the food bank. So they get their kind of dried from the food bank, maybe 3 times they're allowed in a certain period of time. But we also were donated fresh bread from our local baker. And we will take that out to people, and we're taking it from the co-op are giving us their extra food, and wherever we can basically get food from, we share it. I won't tell you about our farm then, because I think we come to the end of it. But we've got 6, 7 different projects going, and that's just grown up over the years. Menshed, our cooking project, therapeutic for people with mental health support needs, our jam making, fetes and markets we go out to. That's the garden for our community. The CSA project I will dangle in front of you, but not say much about, but it's a community supported agriculture where we basically do veggie boxes out to the community, and they support us by, you know, signing up for a month at a time, and we give them the best food we can possibly get out there. Okay. Oh, I'm not going to go into more because I've done my time, have I?
You have.
Okay,
Thank you so much. It's amazing. Now, will you stop sharing your screen there? Now, anybody who is not inspired by Kate's presentation, this is what we need, you know, in every community. Now, I am lucky enough to get my food box from that amazing farm of Kate's at Trefoil Farm. So yes, this is exactly what we need to be focusing on, is how we can make it real about bringing food into the community. So looking at that kind of like small scale market gardens, and moving over to Andrew, where we're going to also talk about, you know, cattle in agriculture. And, you know, I mean, cattle have got a bad rap. So, you know, it's really important to bring somebody into the conversation who can, you know, actually talk to us about, you know, are all cattle bad? So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you. Can you see me?
Can see you, yep.
Jeff, could you put up the first slide, please?
Right, yeah.
No, we're not seeing it, Jeff. Oh, here we go.
There we go. Okay, I'm Andrew Knowles, I'm farmer at Trenchmore Farm with my daughter. We're striving to be ethical in terms of animal welfare and doing the right thing. We're striving to be environmentally sustainable as best we can, and at the same time trying to be economically sustainable, which is not as easy as it sounds. Trying to square those three things, if you like, or balance those three things is the constant challenge and the joy of farming. Okay, can we look at the next slide, please, Jeff? So this is the sign outside our farm, as it says. We do Sussex beef, and we also make cider. I'm not going to talk much about cider today, but we have an organic orchard, about 5 acres with about 1,500 trees in it. And there is some integration between the two. We feed the apple pomace after we've pressed the juice to the cattle, and that inspired the name Silly Moo. And we sell cider to some of the people who buy our beef, and we sell beef to some of the people who buy our cider. Okay, can we have a look at the next slide? I'm really going to talk about cattle and regenerative farming tonight. I'm going to try not to get sucked too much into the moral rights and wrongs of producing beef cattle. What I will say is we are trying to produce beef and balance their welfare and balance the environmental impact of the total operation of farming. We're a mixed farm, so we do grow some arable, we grow wheat in a mixed population, in a diverse population, in a rotation with primarily grass lays, herbal lays to feed the cattle. We have Sussex cows, which is the dark red girls that you can see in this field with their calves, and we father the calves with a red Wagyu bull, who is the fine-looking gentleman in the middle of this picture that you can see. His name is Red Emperor, and he was the foundation bull that started us off with the Wagyu breed. Why do we grow Wagyu? And what is Wagyu, you might ask? Wagyu is Japanese for Japan cow. Basically, it's a breed of cattle that have a very high genetic potential to store fat within the muscle, what's known as marbling, which enhances the quality of the meat. Could we have a look at the next slide, please, Jeff? So that's a 4 rib of beef. The chef on the left is the head chef at Gravetime Manor up in West Hoathly, and those 2 pieces of beef, that's a 4 rib in the middle, and those are short ribs on the right hand side. And you can see quite a lot of like lines of fat running through the meat, which is actually a healthier fat in the Wagyu breed. It's quite high in oleic and linoleic acid. And so that marbling within the meat does enhance the flavour, and it also bastes the meat when it's cooked, which provides a superior eating experience. And we set out with a relatively small farm, farming about 400 acres here, To be commercially viable in beef, you need to have a reasonable scale. And one way of having scale at a smallish size like that is to deal direct with restaurants and indeed the end customers. And so that's what we set out to do. And that's what led us down the road of the Wagyu cross. Can we have a look at the next slide, please, Jeff? We farm with a suckler herd. That means that the calves, unlike dairy cross beef, which now forms the majority of beef that's sold and produced in the UK and probably in the world, we are farming a traditional native suckler herd. That means the calves stay with their mums until they are 7 or 8 months of age, when we will wean them. It's a much more natural way of producing beef. It's a much kinder way of producing beef. You're not taking the calf away from its mother as you would be in the dairy industry in a matter of days from birth. So they have time to bond, and they do form very close friendship groups with other calves in the same group. So we basically wean them at about 7 or 8 months, by which time the mum has pretty well stopped producing milk. They don't really need milk at all in their diet, but they do enjoy being with their mum. So we soft wean them along a fence line. It allows them still to be in contact with each other when they're separated. We have 2 or 3 days of shouting and moaning, and then basically everything calms down and everybody moves on. And the cow 3 months later will be ready to calve again. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? We are grazing, beautiful Sussex pastures all through the summer months. We are on the Weald here, on the edge of the Weald clay. It's very heavy land. Once we get to the end of October, it tends to become too wet to support cattle, and so we have to bring them in and house them. When we get to March or April, we will start to turn them out and put them onto the fresh pastures. This year was an exceptionally wet and late spring, as you probably recall. So we actually put some out in very early May, was the first ones that we got out this year. That's the latest in my experience of farming ever. We put them out on the 5th of May, and we had an unexpected 15 mil of rain on the night of the 6th of May. And on the 7th of May, we brought them all back in. We put them back in the shed for another week. And then we put them all out again in the middle of May, and the weather changed. And as you probably remember, it then turned very dry, everything dried up. And actually the spring caught up quite quickly, and out they went onto the pastures, and that's where they stayed until the end of October. Okay, can we look at the next slide? Cattle definitely get a bad rep, and there are good things about cattle and there are bad things about cattle, and there are certainly ways of farming cattle that are much kinder to the environment, and there are ways of farming cattle that are much less kind to the environment. We try very hard to do it in a way that is kind. One of the things I will say that cattle do for diversity is they poop, and we don't treat them as a routine with wormers or fly sprays. And the reason we do that is because the pesticides that are in those treatments will get pooped out, and then the dung beetles will take up some of that pesticide and it will kill the dung beetles. So we no longer farm in that way. We take fecal samples, so basically we go around with plastic bags and plastic gloves, and we collect samples of their dung. We send them off on regular intervals. We get them assessed for the worm burden. If the worm burden is high enough, then we would need to treat. We found that we very rarely need to treat for worms. There used to be an absolute standard every year. Pretty well all the farmers in this area would treat with wormers. And guess what? If there's no dung beetles, there's no birds, because there's no insects for them to eat. And so we've stopped doing that, and we find that we get a lot more bird life coming onto the farm, particularly the swallows in early summer go crazy, but also a whole variety of different birds coming onto the farm. And that's one of the simple things we've been able to do to change the impact of farming on nature. Can we look at the next slide, please, Jeff? In the winter, we have to bring them in, as I said, so we house them in a variety of sheds. This is a roundhouse, which is the principal cattle shed we have. A roundhouse is, as the name would imply, it's a large umbrella. Basically, it's a 30-meter diameter umbrella. It was even constructed like an umbrella, so it has a central pole. And basically, all those metal structures you can see that form the girders that take the canvas roof were on the ground, and slowly we jacked it up the metal pole, put it up about a meter at a time, stick a pin in, take down the jacks, raise them up, push it up another metre, and eventually you have done exactly what you do with an umbrella. You've pushed it up, and you've got a 30 metre Kevlar. It is actually made of roof. It has a small chimney in the middle. You can see that, and that allows the air to escape, and that keeps the air fresh inside. So there's much lower humidity in the atmosphere inside, which means that we never have to treat for pneumonia. In many cattle herds, antibiotics get used as rather too often and as a regular thing because they have damp in the sheds, and cattle are very prone to chest diseases. With this shed, we just don't do it. We've virtually never used antibiotics on this farm, and we are monitored for it, and we know exactly how much we use, which is very little. Okay, can we see the next slide? Obviously, housing them in the winter, we have to conserve a lot of fodder, so we need straw, and we get that from our wheat, and we also buy it off other arable farmers who don't have livestock locally, and we make hay and we make silage, rather too much of it, huge quantities, because they do eat a fair bit in the winter, and that's what you can see there. Look at the next slide, please. So we basically take 2 or 3 cuts a year of silage and hay off fields like this. This is a field that when I started farming this land here 12 years ago was assessed at just under 4% organic matter. Today it's 10, and we've got it to go from under 4% to 10% by a variety of means. One of them is compost. Some of you have talked about compost already. This field's probably had 1,000 tons of green waste compost spread on it. In actual fact, somebody was saying earlier about compost, can farmers not get hold of compost? We can. The main producer of compost in this area that takes all the council green waste from domestic bin collections is Olus. Olus will bring compost and they will tip it on the edge of this field. There's still a huge line of compost on this field for free, but I have to spread it, and the spreading obviously costs money. So it doesn't come free, but it is a resource that is getting used, and it used to be contaminated with too much plastic, and a lot of farmers were put off by that. I badgered them to sort the plastic out and said I wouldn't take it anymore if they didn't get the plastic out of it. We weren't the only people who were saying that to them, and in fact, I suspect the Environment Agency had a word as well. They put in much better screens and sieves. There's very little plastic in it now, and basically we spread green waste compost every year on this field, along with farmyard manure, and it has revolutionised the field, increasing the organic matter that much. It's a mixed herbal ley. It contains a large amount of grass, but it also contains a lot of other species, because diversity in the ley makes an amazing difference to the amount of green carbon that is captured by the plants and put into the soil. So sometimes later in the season, the clover tends to take over. And as you can see, this field was amazing. When I mowed this for silage, this was the 3rd cut. It was buzzing with bees. This is primarily a red clover cut at that time, and that's fantastic high protein feed for cattle. Okay, can we look at the next slide, please? There are 5 tenets of regenerative agriculture. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, so I'm not going to labour it, but basically you need to protect the soil from damage from rainfall in particular, and from trampling by cattle when it's too wet. You need to try and grow a diverse range of species. Each species feeds different sugars into the soil, and those help the soil biology to survive and be diverse in itself. That's for the reason you always need a living root. Without living roots, you're not sending sugars into the soil. If you're not sending sugars into the soil, the biology tends to die of starvation. And you should try and practice as little tillage and disturbance of the soil as you possibly can, because every time you disturb the soil, you open it up to oxygen, and that tends to allow the carbon to burn off as carbon dioxide. It also destroys the fungal hyphae, and so reduces their impact, and it does more damage to the soil microbiome. And likewise, you should practice minimal synthetics. I used to buy about 65 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer a year. I used to put phosphate fertilizer on, and I used to have to lime as a consequence, because those fertilizers are acidic and acidify the soil. I'm down to 10 tons of ammonium nitrate, no phosphates, no liming required anymore, and I use very small amounts of synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and I don't use any insecticides any longer. That has helped the soil improve the organic matter as well. And finally, if you involve livestock in the operation, you use adaptive grazing, which helps to actively capture soil carbon into the soil. And obviously the manure from the cows is a very key part of our fertilizer these days. We've essentially substituted synthetic fertilizer with farmyard manure and green waste. So if I just rattle through some pictures of those things. This is armour on the soil. This is a crop of grass that we sowed this autumn. It was sown into volunteer spring barley from a spring barley crop that we'd harvested in August. Spring barley crop was relatively late this year because of the season. We, rather than trying to spray off the spring barley, which would be common practice with glyphosate, we decided to drill grass. Well, it's a herbal ley, actually. It's a 10 species herbal ley. So it's grass, it's clovers, it's vetches, it's plantain, it's got chicory and so on in it. And we drilled that into the stubble of the spring barley. The spring barley got going first, but the spring barley is a warm season crop, and we've just had a few good frosts, and guess what? The spring barley is dying and the grass is coming through from underneath. And what the spring barley did was it protected the soil whilst the grass was getting established, because we have had about 14 inches of rainfall since the middle of October when that crop herbal ley was sown. 14 inches is exactly half our annual rainfall, and we've had it in about 6 weeks. So it's been very wet and very muddy if it weren't for that spring barley as a cover crop, and now it's dying off. Everything
And
good.
Andrew, can we just have to wrap you up there soon? So we just need, if you just like finish up there, that'd be great. Thank you.
Just rattle through. Next crop. Sorry, next slide, Jeff. That's what the herbal leys look like in summer. That's what we do with the cattle, which is trample them. They eat a third, we trample a third, and we leave a third behind for faster regrowth. And that's how it looks in the summer. Next slide. That's direct drill wheat into grass, and so no cultivation whatsoever. It's had a spray of glyphosate in order to establish the crop, but that's the only spray it will get. It may have to have a broadleaf weed killer in the spring. Very low input, no diesel, very straightforward. See how that is in the spring. I photographed that 2 days ago. Okay, next slide. I'm not going to talk about the fundamentals of soil because you've heard some of that from the other speakers, and I've run out of time, I'm afraid, so we'll rattle on to the next slide if I may. This is what high organic matter soil looks like. This field is a field that was 5% 10 years ago. As you can see from the data at the bottom, it's 13.3 at one end and 10% at the other end. Look at the next slide, please, Jeff. That's what good soil structure should look like. It looks like chocolate cake. It's full of worms. It's got a beautiful crumb structure. And that's what we've managed to create by the method of diverse species, by minimal tillage, minimal cultivation, minimal synthetics, farmyard manure and black manure, and cattle grazing the fields. Next slide. That's the spreader that we use to spread the Aeolus compost and the farmyard manure. Next slide. When we try and judge the quality of our leys, we use a water infiltration test. That field I just showed you, I put 3 inches of water inside that brown piece of pipe, banged it into the ground so it was sealed, put 3 inches of water in it, and I timed how long it took for that 3 inches of water, which is the equivalent of a 3-inch rain event. And 3-inch rain events are not unusual in the world nowadays. And we haven't had one yet, but we certainly will at some point. So I put 3 inches of water in it, and I measured how long it took to go into that field. It took less than 60 seconds to take 3 inches of water into the ground. I tried it on a different field, 3 fields away from that one. Same soil type, same farmer, but basically that field was owned by somebody else until recently, and it's been inarable since the war, and it's been heavily cultivated by ploughing and power harrowing to establish the crop. I took it over, I put it into grass, but it's only been in grass for 12 months. I put 3 inches of water in it, and an hour later there was still 1.5 inches of water in the tube. So the water, if you had 3 inches of water on that field, it would simply run off the top, and it would take all the lovely nutrients and so on off the top. So that's basically the living proof to me, if you like, that getting your organic matter up helps in so many ways, but particularly with the weather events we're getting now. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, next slide, please. I'm happy to take questions and answers about what we're trying to do, but I do think this is a saying I stole from Gabe Brown, but basically it's not cattle that are all the problem, it's the way that people farm and farm using cattle and not using cattle to improve their soils. And essentially regenerative agriculture is putting the soil first, and that's what we're trying to do here. Final slide, I guess, is wish you all a Merry Christmas and take questions later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Fantastic. So, yeah, well, that's perfect to continue on with Tom, who's absolutely passionate about soil and worms and fungi and compost. So, Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Nicola. Hello, everyone. Thank you, guys. That was awesome. Really cool to hear your story, Ed and Vicky and Andrew. Really awesome presentations. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name's Tom. I I run a brewery called Old Tree, which is a sort of social enterprise that started by getting lots of experience in a woodland and sort of having my worldview completely changed. This was like 10, 12 years ago, sort of finding out that trees are basically made of the air, and, you know, the microbes on the trees are actually what's responsible for rainfall and all of this stuff that just made you realize you know nothing and that you've got everything to learn. And we ended up like starting a kombucha brewery as a sort of way to fund that kind of co-learning and this visiting these woodlands, realizing the woodlands are like actually desperately in need of human interaction again. You know, the coppice is all degraded and there aren't any wolves, and the deer are like eating all of the new generation. It felt like urgent that we do something about that, but we couldn't afford to give all our time for free, so we thought, well, we'll start a brewery to fundraise for that. 10 years later, it's turned out it's actually harder than you think, starting a brewery to fundraise for ecological restoration, and it's not getting any easier. But this was my original inspiration in Brighton, this Lewis Road community garden. A friend of mine put up that banner, and we just moved in and moved plants and compost in and just transformed the space into a community centre. A few years later, I did that on a bigger scale, and that's when I discovered the sort of power of the biology in compost, because I'd always thought of compost as like a substrate that plant roots just grow in, and then you added stuff and they grew. But I realized, like with the steaming compost that we got from this compost tumbler I bought in, that actually there was something going on with the biology. So yeah, it sort of started this compost revolution in my mind and the mind of like others, and I came to sort of study it, and I've studied with a few people. Elaine Ingham's one of them, but like another one was Jairo Restrepo, who teaches beautifully about like the power of biofertilizers and how we can just like ferment these minerals. You know, he makes fertilizers out of rock dust, and it's so disruptive because it totally just like throws the narrative of conventional and chemical farming out of the window. He says we're all part of a mineral spiral, and the function of microbiology is to allow for the unions between minerals and organic matter. And I love this realization that we are all minerals from the earth, which is essentially a rock, and then miracle processes happen, and there was water and the sunlight and the chlorophyll and the plants, but you know, there was a time when the earth was dominated by mushrooms. I was reminded recently, and I really think that we need to reverse this succession that industrial agriculture has taken, which is trying to turn the earth back into a rock and reduce the biodiversity, and we need to cultivate this biodiversity, and the place we need to start that is on a microbial level, and I think fungi are our greatest partners. This is a picture I took only a day ago. This is a field really near me in Lewis that's just been glyphosated, and I haven't like been a farmer yet. I've just done like community garden scale growing, but to me, glyphosate feels wrong, and learning about how it disrupts the sugarcane pathway in plants means that it cannot be good for fungi, because you cannot separate plants and fungi. So I do not think glyphosate, I think it should be banned, and I'd be interested to talk to learn more about it. But there's the one thing that gives me hope is that we can, the biology exists to break down glyphosate and help restore living soil, and in that regard, and we can all cultivate that in compost that we can all make where we live and work. So yeah, the soil carbon sponge, this is how I love to think about soil. Carbon is like the spring in the soil that makes it alive, that makes it into a sponge that can hold the water and can store the carbon. And the fact is, I learned from a TED talk by Walter Jenne that 1 gram of carbon in the soil stores 8 grams of water. And obviously most of the carbon in the world is stored in the soil, or should be stored in the soil. And that's where we can all put it back with proper application of compost. Now, Elaine Ingham is the person who has taught that to the most people in the world right now. The Soil Food web course teaches you how to make complete compost, which I'm going to define in the next slides, but also apply it to land. And it's deeply radical. I love these quotes. Only those who see the impossible, who see the invisible, can do the impossible. And we didn't know what we were doing because we didn't know what we were undoing. You know, this circular web of life that underpins all other webs of life, from organisms, you know, truthfully, most people on the earth couldn't really name, let alone tell you their role and function. And it's fair enough, we can't see them. Like, it's only the microscope work of the last 30 years that Elaine's done and is now teaching everyone that is making this accessible. So this is what healthy soil looks like under a microscope, and that's what dirt looks like. Dirt is soil that's been devoided of life through the wrong kind of grazing or through chemical applications, and dirt is why we see runoff on our fields. What we can do is cultivate fungi that has such ridiculously high biology. All of these creatures, this is Matt Power's illustration of it, beautiful, beautiful work. He's doing some amazing work. He's just published regenerative soil microscopy as well. I'd really recommend checking it out. Yeah, this is essentially the important thing about the Soil Food Web, I think, is that it gives us a tool to measure the fungal to bacterial ratio. So I'm against industrial compost making because it destroys fungi. It doesn't allow for the maturation of fungi. This is why we need fungi. This is like the complete compost is about 1:1, 1 part fungi to 1 part bacteria. And as you can see, when you have the normal ratio, which is like mostly bacteria, that's what happens when soil's been tilled, that's what happens when soil's been glyphosated, you have a soil which is perfect to grow weeds. When you get the fungi up, which you do by the applications of good compost and mulch and biology, you can start to grow the kind of crops that human civilization depends on. My friend Perry runs a business doing these soil testing things now. He did the full Soil Food Web consultancy thing, and he does these reports to me. So this report on the left, I took this year. This is a field that a local farm are turning into a market garden. It's typical of most soils, and as you can see from these things, the fungi is nothing. The protozoa that eat all the bacteria, very little. Nematodes, virtually none. The only thing it's got in it is bacteria. This is some 3-month-old compost that I made in compost tumblers. And that compost, you can see, has got 240,000 protozoas per gram. It's got really high level of nematodes. For only 3 months to have 1,400 of those little nematode worms per gram. They're all eating 10,000 bacteria a day, and that's what's doing all the nutrient cycling. So basically, this compost is the perfect thing to add to this soil, which only has bacteria, because then you get the nutrient cycling and you get to work with all of this beneficial biology. So yeah, Perry provides these services, and that's kind of, I think the most important thing is, like, we spend so much time making compost and so much energy making compost and so much energy gardening and weeding, and it's all could be avoided if we just cultivated fungi instead of bacteria. So one of these early inspirations for me was learning about the terra preta in the Amazon and how they basically created, they changed their soil completely and they changed their climate, and I was inspired ever since I learned about this. Like this is also like the food forest garden inspiration, you know, like they by composting in the ground, and they were actually having kind of recreational gatherings because these pits of black man-made soil are infused with human pottery. Again, this has only been discovered in the last 30 years by a different like sort of perspective on soil ecology. So yeah, adding biochar to compost is something that I'm deeply passionate about now. I recently hosted an event with some speakers who also use Jura compost tumblers to make high biology compost, and they are funded kind of by a company that does engineering to manufacture localized charcoal producing systems. Charcoal is such a great habitat for microorganisms. And I think that when we're looking at how to restore the biology to fields, like you were saying, Andrew, the rain events can be, you know, that you could wash away all that biology like quite easily if it was in the wrong kind of form, or like, so biochar, I know, is such a good habitat for those microbes, and I think could help build up soil carbon a lot quicker. So these are this is one of my what I consider like the greatest like things that I've installed with Old Tree Soil, the composting business, which has only been going since lockdown. It's a community garden compost station that just really effectively runs itself, because it's got these gardeners that really value the compost, and it's got local people that really value having somewhere to put their food waste. And it's this like loved green space that gets used all the time, and people pay, and it makes a small amount of money to pay for our expenses of keeping it supplied. But it's just the sort of nice circular economy. I think we could have compost stations like this everywhere. They don't have to be with Duras. I supply these, but they could be with compost with Rydans and bigger things. I mean, there are other ways of doing it, and that's what I want to share, is all the ways that are making compost, and what is the best way we can utilize all these resources. And that's why I'm running this mycelium composting network. These are some of the events that I've done on it in the past 6 months, and these have been really awesome. It's like shining a light on people that are absolutely trailblazing in their fields, literally. And like, so there's biochar one recently. Mary just is a mycologist. It's a mycologist, and she had an amazing presentation about soil carbon and a complete paradigm shift. And then Josh Sparks, I'd really recommend checking out his natural farming philosophy. Looking to do a bigger event with him next year, but he's doing some incredible work with natural farming inspired by the Japanese approach. So sort of bringing all this together and building a community where all of this knowledge can be preserved. So I've made like, we've got it's a Mighty network. It's a type of like app which has got different spaces. So there's like biochar, mycology, regenerative, natural farming, funding for local composting, you know, a space for people, everyone making complete compost with the compost tumblers together. You get like big discounts on Bokashi, big discounts on the compost tumblers by signing up. It's a paid space to create a resource for the future, but I'm personally like I'm offering like sponsored places for farmers and growers, because it's all about, you know, this idea that we could operate like fungi and recycle locally, and then we could actually make this complete compost, which is so valuable, by the way. It's the most farmers in America in the Soil Food Web School, they're teaching people how to use compost that's worth £1,000 a ton, and you only need 1 ton per acre to completely restore the biology, which then does the work for you, working with the plants and the cover crops to build deeper soils. And cover crops actually do way more to sequester carbon, I found out, than applying composts. They do twice as much per year. So because they're just turning sunlight into carbon, aren't they? So yeah, there's a whole world sort of school that's being created here, and I'd love it if you would all participate, because everyone that, you know, does subscribe enables me to give it to like a farmer or a student or someone that wouldn't be able to subscribe for free, and we can make it more equal, equitable, and have complete compost for everyone. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good job, Tom. That was like, you know, you got through that amazing amount of information. And, you know, we could have had like a whole knowledge share on each person tonight. But this is really, you know, giving us a taster, you know, the subject, you know, where does your Christmas dinner come from? You know, when we really think about that, the food that we buy and the food that we're about to put on our tables, where does it come from? And this is why I thought it was so important that we start to look at that. You know, who is actually already working with the soil, working in their local communities. So that's the first step, is becoming aware that there are people out there doing this great stuff, and it needs replication. We need more people copying, what's going on here. Nature works really well with replication. So I'm just going to finish off by sharing as well, taking it from the local to the global. And mine's not going to go onto big screen. There we go. So my work over the last 20 years has been with agriculture in the Amazon. We're all really aware of this massive amount of deforestation that goes for our food. And, people say, oh, it's all for palm oil. Well, it's not all for palm oil. A lot of it's for coffee and for sugar and for chocolate and for soy to feed the animals that we eat. So, I can jump up and down and say, save the forests. But unless I teach another system of agriculture, we are all part of this story. So since 2016, I've been teaching agroforestry. And so this is what we're doing in communities, is teaching them about a system called Inga alley cropping. And so far now I'm working with, I have over 100 farmers, I have 12 indigenous communities and 8 agricultural colleges, teaching them a different system so that they don't have to cut the forest down and burn it to be able to make some fertile soil, that they can actually be working on the soil themselves. So, it's amazing. Loads of women, loads of children, all the different people in the communities have been really seeing the benefits of this work. So what is agroforestry? What is alley cropping? Here you can see really clearly, this is what it's all about. We grow alleys of trees, and we particularly work with one tree called Inga edulis. It's a nitrogen fixing tree. We can bring that over to the UK and we can still do agroforestry here and integrate more trees into our landscape, but which doubles up once they're pollarded and cut back like this. All the leaf matter is left in between the alley, which then in the tropics, in 6 weeks, this is actually rotted down and turns into perfect compost. The wood is taken away. But by continually chopping and dropping and allowing that to turn into fertile soil, it enables people to grow. The wood that we have as our byproduct, we turn into biochar. And we don't have any fancy biochar making stuff. We're doing it like Tom showed, how they originated it in the Amazon. So it's like we've taken back the use of biochar back to the Amazon by turning this pollarded wood into biochar, which then gets put into the ground. This man up in the top corner, he couldn't believe it when he applied biochar to the top of his ground, that usually you can imagine what it's like in the Amazon. Everything gets eaten. And he just kept going out looking at his beans saying, I can't believe the chupadoras, the suckers, the insects are not eating all his beans. They were not crossing over the biochar. There's still so much research that needs to go into the work of biochar. And Tom touched on it. It's like biochar acts as a home for all those good beneficial microbes and fungi. And the results that we're having in the Amazon is absolutely amazing. So the increase in yield when you work with these systems of agroforestry, we're not needing to put in any kind of chemical input at all. Originally, if you don't eat organic chocolate, you want to, because it is sprayed with a lot of fungicide. Cacao came from the forest and we took it out, we turned it into a monoculture, and cacao doesn't like that. And so they have to spray it with a lot of fungicide to prevent the pod rot. We accidentally discovered by using this system of agriculture that they don't get any fungus. So this is a game changer, to be able to increase yield so much without using any kinds of agrochemicals. So by teaching, others how, they can help feed themselves and have more for market without cutting down the forest is a win-win. So this is the recent threat, the recent agricultural driver. And this was just a couple of months ago. A friend sent me this and she said, look, Nicola, they're clearing so much new land in the forest. I said, what's it for? She said, it's taro. They're all growing taro. And I said, well, why are they growing taro? And I put it out there trying to find out, where's it going? It's all coming to Europe and to the USA. Why? What is taro? This is it here. So this landscape is being cleared and we are buying it in, and it's being turned into plant-based food. So on one side, we think the vegan diet, the plant-based diet is the answer. But if we are creating new drivers to make new processed food, is that really environmentally friendly? But if this is a new current driver in the market that, we want plant-based food, therefore, what is it going to be made out of? We're starting to do our own tests to grow taro in between our alleys. So, well, okay, let's see. Can we just grow this crop, which is currently in demand? Instead of cutting down more forest, let's just use these old abandoned cattle fields and actually regenerate them and grow whatever the demand is for. So, when we look at this, where does it come from? The Christmas dinner, just looking at the miles that some of the food that will be enjoyed, there are still turkeys. They're not all coming from the UK. They're still coming from Brazil. People are still eating their green beans from Kenya and the wine from Australia and the cranberries from Massachusetts and the chestnuts, most probably from Spain, not from the UK. So, we can see that actually, when we look at really where is our food coming from, if we don't think about it, it can actually be coming from all around the world. So one really great source, which I highly recommend, is Ethical Consumer. You can get it in a magazine and you can also find it online. And they go into everything in detail that to see actually how good are they. And, they're kind of marked on a number of different things. And you can see down the bottom, as always, are Asda, Aldi and Tesco. Yeah. To see where our food is coming from. And these companies that we're supporting, who do you want to give your money to? So I think using these amazing resources that Ethical Consumer have to make us aware of our purchasing power, then we can really kind of break it down and make these conscious choices about where our food comes from. So, just a little bit of a death by PowerPoint to end it up here. Approximately 10 million turkeys are eaten in the UK every year for Christmas. An average Christmas turkey of 6 kilos has the carbon footprint, the equivalent of 65.4 kilos, the same as driving 162 miles. Putting some of this into perspective, at least 66% of Britons admit to buying too much food, with around 7 million tonnes going to waste, which is the equivalent to 2 million turkeys, 5 million Christmas puddings, and 74 million mince pies. So, looking at that picture previously, if we take into account just the Christmas pudding and the spices from Sri Lanka and the raisins from California and the fruit from Turkey, we're still looking at a seriously well-traveled international dessert. So the solutions, what is it? It's local, 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 ideally organic and loose. Less meat and ensure it's local. More veg, local wine. Can we make soup out of the leftovers and freeze it or give it away rather than allowing anything to enter into the bin? And finally, to be grateful for every mouthful we eat. And remember to give thanks to those that grew it, to the water, to the soil, to all the microbes that live in the soil, and all that it took to arrive on our table. Because so often we forget that which is so normal in so many cultures, to just be aware and to give thanks. So, I just wanted to kind of broaden out the perspective to, thinking globally, thinking locally, and being aware on those choices that we make. So, time for questions. I've already got a couple of questions here. And so please, anybody that's got any questions, put them in the chat. But we've got one here for Ed. So Ed, can you please explain about working with the natural rhythms?
Yeah, well, I say it's a concept that I'm really working on, actually, but very much I really feel that we've been sort of duped by the clock and the calendar, and we can actually use the moon very much as our real cyclical sort of our real natural cycles are really around that moon. So this next year I'm going to be doing a real sort of celebration actually each month around trying to create celebrating what happens in each sort of lunar cycle. So the wolf moon in January is like what it's all about, that renewal and the returning of light, and we're gonna light a fire, and we're gonna play the drums together, around this fire, and we're gonna try and understand like how we can bring about these solutions that we need to bring about change this next year, because I'm really into trying to make some more change this next year. And I think it's all about having this sort of this momentum. And if you have a celebration each lunar cycle, which I think is much more of a natural cycle, then you can sort of really create a much more of a community-based solution, I'm hoping anyway. So yeah, I'm still developing the idea, but yeah, please do follow, and you'll hear a lot more on my Instagram and stuff as I sort of develop the idea over the next few months.
Well, interestingly, working, for over half my life with Indigenous communities in the Amazon, for them, working with the moon is just normal. People that don't work with the moon are a bit weird. And so when we started the alley cropping project, I was like, okay, maybe it might make a difference if we pollard with the moon. So we were like, well, okay, well, let's just do the experiments. And sure enough, it does. More mold is allowed and there's more rot if we don't pollard at the right time of the moon. So we've just started to do it by our own experiment, which is totally backed up by the Indigenous wisdom that have always and still do always plant with the moon. So yeah, thank you for bringing that in, Ed. Andrew, got one for you here, Andrew. How long have you been working without wormers and fly treatments?
About 3 years. I only discovered the full impact of ivermectin wormers about 3 years ago. And after that, I stopped using them. And that was because of the dung beetles.
Yeah. And I know they've been having similar issues at Knepp, where people ride their horses across the Knepp estate that have been treated by wormers, and they can't control people riding across and wondering what's happening to the beetles, and it's actually the wormers in the horses that are being ridden across there. But whilst we've got you here, maybe you can be the first to answer this. This is to all the speakers. I'm a big fan of these techniques, but keen to hear how the speakers respond to the skeptics who question whether productivity with these methods is sufficient to feed the country, the world. What have you got to say there, Andrew?
Well, the evidence for regenerative ag from people who've been practicing it for reasonable numbers of years is that in the first few years you suffer yield loss, and in the later years, once you've got your soil healthy and the kind of plant soil microbiology is in harmony and is synergistic, you will often get comparable yields or slightly lower yields than you would get with the most intensive farming, but you will make more money because you have not spent as much on the synthetic ingredients. And I would say as time goes by, it's getting harder and harder to produce acceptably high yields to pay for all those synthetic ingredients, because the climate is getting more difficult. The soil is getting more damaged. I'll give you one thing that really opened my eyes to regenerative agriculture. Was a neighbour of mine, is an arable farmer. He's been farming in this neighbourhood for about 40 years, and he does a lot of the arable for us. And he told me that when he was a young man, he would plough his farm, he would plough a field with a 120 horsepower tractor, and he could plough about 40 acres a day. And today he ploughs with a 260 horsepower tractor, and until he started growing cover crops and regenerative agriculture, he was ploughing 40 acres a day. And that was because the soil had got heavier and tighter, and so it took more energy, more diesel, basically, and so he had to go slower to turn over the soil. And that is just a very clear example of how the synthetic approach is just, it's a cul-de-sac, and we're coming to the end of it. So I think actually we can feed the world with regenerative agriculture, and it's probably the only hope we've actually got of doing it in a semi-environmentally sensitive way.
Thanks. And I think it's also really important to remember that most of the world's food is grown by small farmers. You know, we have this idea that most of the food comes from big ag. It doesn't. It comes from lots of small farmers. So, you know, I think that, you know, we often think that, yes, it's big agriculture that feeds the world. And, you know, for anybody that wants to know more, then Oxford Real Farming Conference, you know, sign up to that, and that will really give you a massive overview in, you know, the future of regenerative agriculture. Kate, if you come on.
Yeah, I've got a really small scale kind of take on that actually, but I did a lot of allotment gardening. I was gardening an allotment for a lady who wanted it organic, and the very first thing that I got was all the old boys going, "Oh, what you're doing there with your mulching and your composting and your beds and all of this sort of stuff." And actually my answer is the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You know, really just how quickly, if you're working, I didn't get to show it actually, but we put a lot of rock dust and a lot of compost and a lot of biochar, and have a 3-layer mulch kind of no dig on our market garden. And what we're producing in a very, very small area is ridiculous, and the quality of it and the vibrancy of it, and in a very short amount of time we have one day a week on the farm, and now we're sort of there a little bit more, but setting it up so with the design, the permaculture design, and the kind of really looking after the soil and allowing nature to do the work and kind of working with nature, I think it's much more productive for less effort, and certainly, you know, without the chemicals and all the rest of it, which is why I was showing a lot of wildlife, because actually that's you know, nature's services, and you get tick tick tick, it's working all the way. So the things, you know, food that's grown in a more, well, it's not traditional, is it? It's this kind of agricultural chemical way, you know, and it might get a huge amount of food and it might be really, really cheap, but the price of it on our environment, on our health, on our well-being is huge. And that, you know, when you put all that together, small scale regenerative, you know, comes out much, much higher, I think.
And also going on from that, there's another question about, it might be very well for people who can afford to buy veg boxes, but will these methods be able to feed a growing world population?
So can I answer that?
Yeah.
So I'm really, really keen on good food being accessible to all. That's absolutely our original mission. So community gardens are a really good place to do that, because everybody gets involved, doesn't matter what ability they are, everyone gets a share for free. We also take our food out to people using the food bank. I think every community can do that. We also gather food being thrown away by local shops, or, you know, we've got partnerships with other businesses that will help us distribute this food or give us food to distribute. And on the market garden, basically we have a sort of, we can sell to, because we have to make it, you know, we have to be able to be there. So we sell to local shops, and then we basically do the CSA, which is much cheaper than you would get it in a shop, but it works for us because we can give what we've got an abundance of, and we're careful not to give the same thing all the time. And then volunteers can come and they take their food for free. So, you know, there's a whole way on the smaller scale, and we are tiny scale, but it doesn't mean you can't scale that up a little bit. And if every community's got a market garden or community garden, there's always healthy, good food for free or just for a return of some labour.
Can I
Ed,
just add to this?
yeah.
I just wanted to sort of promote this idea. This one here, Chris Smage, Small Farm Future, really sort of sets out, the economics behind how we can feed the world using small farms and low energy systems. And I just really wanted to sort of put that across. What's set out in this book really does demonstrate how we can use a fraction of the amount of land and we can feed our population. It does take a lot of societal change and cultural sort of shift, to low energy systems and towards a lower consumption of meat for sure. But it's it does allow for meat, and this actually really does take into account a lot of the threats that we have coming with climate change and the amount of people that are going to be moving from the global south, and how we may be able to feed them as well. So I can really recommend A Small Farm Future by Chris Smage to sort of really understand where we might be able to take it in the whole relocalization of our food. But yeah, it's going to really need a cultural shift, a lot more farmers out there and access to land. So yeah.
Tom, did you want to add in anything there?
I just wanted to suggest on that book that you just shared, Ed. The book I just finished reading, The Book of Trespass. I found it so educational about the history of land in this country and the whole Rights to Roam campaign thing. I thought was really, it's compelling. And yeah, this vision of a localized, networked, local, it's the only place we can start. And what we know is that industrial chemical agriculture is now demonstrating on most of the world's land the law of decreasing returns, and the cost of making these chemicals is going up and the yields that they're getting is going down. And what Elaine Ingham showed, the only reason it showed a huge increase in yields and arguably led to the population spike of the last 50 years was because we'd already been treating the land, we'd already been reducing the biology and stuff in that land. And then when obviously you chuck loads of nutrients on it, it has a positive effect. Now the structure of the earth itself is lost. The only way we're going to get the structure of the earth itself back is by putting the biology back, and really the only way we can do that, it's not easy to do on a commercial industrial scale. It just totally invites everyone to step up and farm biology. And if we all farm biology and we all apply biology locally, then we have a sort of a baseline, a bread line, a fundamental exchange, that nutrient, energy exchange for the future. And it's not just the nutrient density of the food or anything like that. It's actually how resilient can we make the land around us. I see the land around me washing down the drains here in Sussex, and I know that destroys the coral reefs and it destroys the kelp forests. And what we need in the kelp forests, they draw down 10 times more carbon. And the only way we're going to get the kelp forests back is by sorting out our soil, because we need the soil to sponge all of that and clean the water in the kelp forest. It's all one. And I love the quote. Jeff Lavenfalls gave it to me on Instagram. He's just yes, he said, life is the question, compost is the answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Tom. So as we just wrap up now, hopefully we've all got, some inspiration, some ideas about what we can do in our local communities. There's also in the chat, for anybody that is wanting to help on some land in Fakeham, a potential of, a huge bit of agricultural land, so have a look in the chat. And if you're interested, there's a contact in there with Caroline. And Jeff asking about where to find biochar. Well, where people are coppicing, they are now starting to make biochar. So, really finding out who your local coppice group is, working with them, and, what's the difference between charcoal and biochar. That's a whole other story we could go down. But really, everywhere there are coppice groups, those are the ones that we need to be ensuring that we get the biochar from. Also, with larger farms, I'm also working with a big group of people with biochar, saying, well, actually, what about if we localized it and when the hedges were trimmed, that trimming from the hedges was actually turned into biochar right there and kept on the farm. So, you know, really kind of bringing it back into the system, round and around. That's what we've got to do. We've got to close this loop. And, you know, these are some of the big answers. You know, we can't talk about climate change without talking about agriculture. We can't talk about biodiversity loss without talking about agriculture. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And thank you so much for all the speakers. This will be recorded and sent out through the SECA website. For those of you that are not already a SECA member, then please do go to the Southeast Climate Alliance's website. That's SE as in Southeast, Southeast SE Climate Alliance.uk, and join up. You can join up as an individual member, or you can join up as a member organization. So you'll see those links are in the chat, and along with all the speakers that were here tonight. So thank you very much, and do keep a lookout for our future knowledge sharing. Thank you for Jeff for helping to host this, and to Talia, who's going to write this up. Before we finish, a couple of other books I'm reading at the moment. 60 Harvests Left by Philip Limbury. I would highly recommend that. And the other one is Rooted by Sarah Langford. So both of those books, really good if you want to understand more about agriculture. And if there's any tickets left, sign up for the Oxford Real Farming Oxford Real Farming Conference, which you can see online if you can't attend in person. So thank you all very much. And look at that, on time, on the dot. We could have carried on for a lot longer, but thank you all and have a good night. Bye-bye.